Sometimes the future of an entire kingdom rests in the hands of the one person everyone else has learned to overlook. Rain swept across the narrow mountain road in silver sheets, turning the packed dirt into dark ribbons of mud as Olivia Brooks tightened her grip on the old wooden reins. The small medicine wagon creaked beneath the weight of dried herbs, clean bandages, and glass bottles that chimed softly with every bump in the trail. At 23, Olivia had spent most of her life traveling between forgotten villages where healers were welcomed only after hope had already begun to fade. She had learned long ago that kindness rarely earned applause, but it always mattered to someone. Tonight, however, even the forest seemed restless. The wind carried the distant pounding of horses, followed by the sharp cry of ravens bursting from the towering pines. Her chest tightened. Travelers avoided this road after sunset for good reason. Stories drifted through every tavern in the Northern Territories about royal patrols searching every bridge, every farmhouse, every abandoned mill. They were hunting someone important. No one seemed to know exactly who, only that the missing Alpha Prince had vanished 3 nights earlier without a trace. Some whispered he had fled. Others believed enemies had spirited him away. Olivia never paid much attention to palace gossip. Kings ruled castles. She healed ordinary people. Those worlds were never meant to meet. A flash of pale fabric tumbled from the rocky hillside ahead. Before she could react, a motionless figure slid through the rain and came to rest beside the wagon wheel. Olivia pulled the reins hard, and the old mule stopped with a startled snort. For a heartbeat she simply stared. The stranger looked no older than 30, dressed in travel clothes soaked by rain and streaked with dirt from the steep hillside. His breathing was shallow but steady. Dark hair clung across his forehead, and one gloved hand remained wrapped around a silver bracelet engraved with the outline of a running wolf beneath a crescent moon. It was beautifully crafted, far finer than anything a common traveler would own. Olivia climbed down carefully, kneeling beside him as cold rain soaked through her sleeves. His skin felt cool from the storm, but there was warmth beneath it. Alive! Relief escaped her lips before she realized she had been holding her breath. She reached for her satchel, gently checking him for injuries without disturbing him more than necessary. Just as she began wrapping a torn sleeve around one arm, the distant hoofbeats grew louder. Much louder. Then came voices. 8 riders emerged between the pine trees, their dark cloaks snapping behind them as rain rolled from polished armor. Each carried the crest of the royal guard. Olivia's pulse quickened. She instinctively lowered her head, hoping they would pass. Instead, the riders slowed. One pointed toward the muddy trail ahead while another studied the hillside with unsettling patience. They weren't searching randomly. They knew someone had come this way. Olivia looked back at the unconscious stranger. If the riders saw him first, she had no idea what would happen. But something inside her refused to leave him lying in the storm. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she slipped the silver bracelet back into his hand, whispered, "You're safe now," and with surprising determination managed to lift him into the rear of her medicine wagon beneath layers of bundled blankets and fragrant herbs. Moments later the first horse stopped only a few feet away. Rain drummed against the canvas covering the wagon while Olivia steadied her breathing, forcing herself to meet the approaching soldiers with the calm expression of an ordinary traveling healer, never imagining that beneath those blankets rested the missing Alpha Prince every rider in the kingdom had been ordered to find. Olivia forced herself to smile even though her heartbeat echoed louder than the rain striking the canvas above the wagon. The lead rider guided his tall bay horse closer until its nose nearly brushed the weathered wooden side. Water streamed from the polished edge of his cloak as sharp grey eyes swept across the bundles of lavender, mint, and dried willow bark stacked beneath the cover. "State your business," he said calmly. Olivia lowered her gaze with practiced respect. "I am delivering medicine to the villages along the eastern ridge, sir. The fever has returned after the storms." The rider studied her face without speaking. Every passing second felt impossibly long. Behind her, hidden beneath blankets scented with rosemary and cedar, the unconscious stranger remained completely still. She silently thanked every blessing she had ever known that he had not stirred. Another rider approached carrying a rolled parchment protected inside an oilskin tube. He unfolded it just enough for Olivia to glimpse the charcoal sketch of a young man with determined eyes and dark hair. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. She quickly looked away before anyone noticed. "Have you seen this traveler?" the second rider asked. Olivia swallowed carefully. "No, sir. I have not crossed paths with anyone since leaving Briar Hollow this afternoon." The men exchanged brief glances. Something about them unsettled her. Their questions sounded official, yet none of them spoke with concern for the missing prince. Their voices carried only urgency, as though finding him first mattered more than bringing him home safely. The lead rider rested one gloved hand on the edge of the wagon. "Search it." Olivia felt every muscle tighten. Two soldiers dismounted and stepped toward the rear. She closed her eyes for the briefest moment, already imagining the blankets being pulled aside. Then a sharp whistle echoed through the trees. One of the scouts galloped back through the rain, his horse splashing through puddles as he called out, "Fresh tracks near the river crossing. Someone is heading north." The captain immediately turned toward the sound. His expression hardened with sudden purpose. "Mount up. We move now." The soldiers abandoned the inspection without another glance. Within moments the entire patrol thundered down the muddy road, disappearing behind the curtain of rain as quickly as they had appeared. Olivia remained frozen until even the hoofbeats faded into silence. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands trembled as she climbed into the wagon and carefully checked on the stranger. He had not awakened, but his breathing had grown uneven. A faint shiver passed through him despite the heavy blankets. She touched his forehead and frowned. His temperature was rising. He needed warmth, clean water, and proper treatment before exhaustion claimed what little strength he had left. As she adjusted the blanket, the silver bracelet slipped from his relaxed fingers. Moonlight briefly pierced the storm clouds and reflected across its polished surface. For just an instant the engraved wolf seemed almost alive, catching the pale light with an eerie brilliance before fading again. Olivia stared at it, puzzled. She had never seen craftsmanship like this outside royal ceremonies. The realization settled quietly inside her. Whoever this man truly was, powerful people wanted to reach him first, and for reasons she could no longer trust. She climbed back onto the driver's seat, turned the wagon away from the main road, and guided the old mule toward a narrow trail known only to herbal gatherers. Hidden beneath towering pines, the forgotten path wound toward an abandoned forester's cabin that almost no one remembered anymore. If fate had placed this stranger in her care, then for one more night, she would make certain no one found him. The abandoned forester's cabin stood hidden beneath towering pine branches where even the moonlight struggled to reach the forest floor. Moss covered the weathered roof, and climbing vines had claimed most of the stone chimney, making the forgotten shelter appear more like part of the mountain than something built by human hands. Olivia carefully guided the mule beneath the trees before leading it into the old shed behind the cabin where it would remain out of sight. Only after checking the empty woods one final time did she return to the wagon. The stranger remained unconscious, his breathing uneven but steady. She gathered every ounce of strength she had and slowly helped him inside, settling him onto the small wooden bed beside the fireplace. Soon a gentle fire crackled across the dry logs, chasing away the damp chill carried in by the storm. The warm scent of cedar mixed with lavender as Olivia unpacked her healer's supplies. She gently removed his soaked traveling coat, stopping when her eyes caught the fine stitching hidden beneath the fabric. Every thread had been crafted with extraordinary precision. This was clothing made for someone of remarkable importance. Even stranger, beneath the sleeve she found an embroidered crest nearly concealed inside the cuff. It showed a silver wolf standing beneath a full moon surrounded by 12 tiny stars. Olivia had seen that symbol only once as a little girl during a royal celebration that passed through her hometown years before. Her heartbeat quickened. Before she could dwell on the discovery, she noticed another mystery. The injury along his shoulder should have looked worse after hours of travel, yet the skin around it appeared unusually healthy, almost as though his body was quietly trying to repair itself. She cleaned the area with warm water infused with willow bark and mountain sage before wrapping it with fresh linen. As her fingertips brushed his skin, an unexpected warmth spread through her palms. It was subtle at first, almost like sunlight reaching through winter clouds. She quickly pulled back, startled. The sensation vanished immediately. She frowned and reached toward him once more. Again that gentle warmth returned, flowing through her hands before disappearing as though it had never existed. Olivia stared at her palms. Since childhood she had possessed an unusual instinct for soothing pain. People often recovered more peacefully after she treated them, but she had always believed it was nothing more than patience and experience. Tonight felt different. The stranger's breathing gradually became calmer, and the tension that had lined his face since she found him seemed to soften. Then something caught her eye. Resting on the small table beside the bed, the silver bracelet reflected the firelight. For the briefest instant the engraved wolf shimmered with a faint pale glow before becoming ordinary metal once again. Olivia stepped closer, uncertain whether exhaustion had fooled her eyes. She reached toward the bracelet, but before her fingers touched it, the stranger quietly whispered a single word in his sleep. "Mother." His voice carried sadness so deep that Olivia felt her own chest tighten. Moments later another name escaped his lips, softer this time, almost impossible to hear. "Damien." Olivia repeated it under her breath. Damien. Was it his name, or someone he had lost? She had no answer. Outside, the rain finally began to fade, leaving only the whisper of water falling from pine branches. Deep within the silent forest, another pair of unseen eyes watched the forgotten cabin from between the trees. The figure remained motionless for only a moment before disappearing into the darkness without making a sound, carrying with them the knowledge that the missing traveler was still alive. Olivia barely slept. Every unfamiliar sound beyond the cabin walls pulled her awake, and each time she reached for the lantern, half expecting the royal riders to burst through the door. Dawn finally arrived wrapped in pale mist, soft light filtering through the cracks between the weathered logs. For the first time since the storm began, the forest felt almost peaceful. She stepped outside with an empty bucket, collected fresh water from the nearby spring, and paused when she noticed something that made her heart sink. Fresh hoofprints pressed into the damp earth no more than 20 yards from the cabin. Someone had been there before sunrise. Someone had watched without announcing themselves. Olivia hurried back inside and quietly secured the wooden bar across the door. The stranger remained asleep, although the fever that had troubled him during the night had eased. She mixed crushed willow bark with honey and warm water before placing the cup beside the bed, hoping he would wake soon enough to drink it. As she turned to gather more firewood, the silver bracelet slid from the bedside table onto the floor with a gentle metallic sound. The moment it touched the old wooden boards, the fireplace flickered brighter. Olivia froze. The flame steadied almost instantly, but the strange coincidence left an uneasy feeling she could not explain. She picked up the bracelet and noticed something she had missed before. Hidden inside the polished band were tiny engraved words, nearly invisible unless the light struck at exactly the right angle. They read, "Faith guides the crown." Her breath caught. That was not the motto of an ordinary noble family. Every child in the Northern Territories had heard those words spoken during royal ceremonies. Before she could gather her thoughts, hurried footsteps approached outside. Olivia instinctively hid the bracelet beneath a folded blanket just as 3 firm knocks echoed against the cabin door. Her pulse raced. She slowly opened the door only a few inches. Standing outside was an elderly woman wrapped in a dark green traveling cloak, carrying a basket filled with herbs. Her silver hair escaped beneath the hood, and kind blue eyes studied Olivia with surprising calm. "You are farther from the main road than most healers choose to travel," the woman said gently. Olivia hesitated before answering. "The storms washed out the bridge." The woman smiled faintly, as though she recognized an incomplete truth but chose not to challenge it. She held out the basket. "I gathered fresh mountain thyme this morning. It helped stubborn fevers." Olivia accepted the herbs with quiet gratitude. As their hands briefly touched, the older woman's expression changed ever so slightly. Her gaze drifted toward the cabin interior before returning to Olivia's face. Your heart is carrying a very heavy secret, she whispered. Olivia stiffened. I do not know what you mean. Perhaps not yet, the woman replied. But remember this. Not everyone wearing a royal crest serves the throne. Those words settled over the cabin like the morning fog itself. Before Olivia could ask another question, the visitor simply turned and disappeared into the trees with remarkable speed for someone of her age. Olivia stepped outside, expecting to catch one last glimpse of her between the pines. There was nothing. Only silence, drifting mist, and birds beginning their morning songs. Confused, she returned indoors. At that exact moment, the unconscious stranger slowly lifted one hand from the blanket. His fingers tightened weakly around empty air, and in a barely audible voice he murmured, "Do not let them take the crown." The whisper lingered in the quiet cabin long after the stranger's lips fell silent again. Olivia stood beside the bed, her fingers still resting lightly against the warm ceramic mug she had prepared only minutes earlier. Do not let them take the crown. The words echoed through her thoughts with unsettling weight. Whoever he was, he carried responsibilities far greater than his own survival. She looked toward the shuttered window where soft morning light filtered through the cracks. The kingdom believed its missing prince had simply vanished. Yet everything she had witnessed suggested a far more troubling truth. Someone had wanted him to disappear without anyone asking why. As she turned back toward the bed, the stranger's eyelids fluttered. His breathing changed first, becoming deeper and steadier. Then, slowly, grey-blue eyes opened and focused on the rough wooden ceiling before drifting toward the unfamiliar room. Confusion crossed his face instead of fear. He blinked several times before noticing Olivia standing nearby. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally he managed a quiet question. "Where am I?" Relief swept through Olivia so suddenly that she almost laughed. "You are safe," she answered softly. "You are in an old cabin deep in the forest." He studied her with obvious effort, as though searching his memory for an answer that refused to appear. "Did you bring me here?" Olivia nodded. "I found you during the storm." He frowned, pressing one hand gently against his temple. "I remember rain. Horses. Then nothing." He closed his eyes briefly before looking at her again. "What is my name?" The question caught Olivia completely by surprise. She hesitated before speaking honestly. "I was hoping you could tell me." His expression tightened with quiet frustration. He searched every corner of his mind, but whatever memories he reached for slipped away like mist through open fingers. After several silent moments he shook his head. "I do not know." Olivia reached into the pocket of her apron and carefully placed the silver bracelet into his hands. "This belonged to you." He stared at the engraved wolf beneath the crescent moon. His fingers instinctively wrapped around it, yet his face revealed no recognition. "It feels familiar," he whispered. "But I still cannot remember." Olivia considered telling him about the royal crest hidden inside his clothing, the mysterious riders, and the questions they had asked. Instead she chose caution. Whoever had been searching the forest might still be close. "Last night you spoke one name while you were sleeping," she said gently. "Damien." He repeated it quietly, testing the sound. "Damien." A strange calm settled over him. "It feels right. Maybe that is my name." Olivia smiled for the first time since the storm. "Then until you remember more, Damien it is." He returned the faintest smile, grateful despite the uncertainty clouding his eyes. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You saved someone you did not even know." Before Olivia could answer, a sharp cry from outside broke the peaceful silence. She moved quickly to the window and looked through a narrow gap in the shutters. Rising above the distant treetops was a thin column of grey smoke. It came from the direction of the main road. Too close. Far closer than it should have been. Damien joined her slowly, still weak but able to stand with support. The moment he looked toward the smoke, an unfamiliar feeling crossed his face. Not recognition exactly, but instinct. Someone is searching again, he said quietly, surprising even himself. Olivia followed his gaze into the forest. Whatever brief safety the hidden cabin had offered was already beginning to disappear, and somewhere beyond the pines, the people hunting Damien were drawing closer with every passing hour. By midday the thin ribbon of smoke had faded into the pale autumn sky, but neither Olivia nor Damien believed the danger had passed. They packed only what they could carry. Olivia filled a worn leather satchel with dried herbs, clean bandages, bread, smoked venison, and 2 small water flasks before covering the cabin fireplace with cool ashes to hide any sign that someone had recently stayed there. Damien insisted on helping even though every careful step reminded him that his strength had not fully returned. He apologized each time he paused to steady himself against the rough log wall, but Olivia answered every apology with the same quiet smile. "Healing takes patience," she said. "You do not owe anyone recovery by sunset." Those simple words settled somewhere deep inside him. They stepped onto the narrow forest trail just as sunlight filtered through the pine branches in long golden beams. The mountain air smelled of cedar and damp earth, carrying the peaceful sounds of distant streams and birds beginning their afternoon songs. For a little while, it almost felt as though the world beyond the trees had forgotten them. Damien glanced at Olivia walking a few feet ahead, confidently choosing hidden paths that ordinary travelers would never notice. "How do you know these woods so well?" he asked. She smiled without looking back. "My father gathered herbs here before I was old enough to carry a basket. He always said the forest protects those who learn to listen before they speak." Damien nodded thoughtfully. "I wish I remembered someone saying things like that to me." He searched his mind again, hoping another memory would surface, but only scattered images appeared. Towering stone walls. A silver banner moving in the wind. A voice calling his name from far away before disappearing into silence. He pressed his fingers against his temple, frustrated. Olivia noticed immediately. "Do not force it," she said gently. "Memories find their own way home." He looked at her with quiet gratitude. "You always know the right thing to say." She laughed softly. "No. I only know what I would want someone to tell me." Hours later the trail opened into a peaceful meadow where an old stone chapel stood beside a crystal-clear spring. Wildflowers surrounded the weathered building, and the small bronze bell hanging above the entrance moved gently in the breeze. An elderly caretaker stepped outside carrying a wooden bucket. The moment his eyes settled on Damien, he froze completely. The bucket slipped from his hands and landed harmlessly in the grass. For several long seconds he simply stared before slowly lowering himself onto one knee. "Your Highness," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Olivia's heart skipped. Damien looked equally confused. "Sir," he answered carefully, "I believe you have mistaken me for someone else." The old man slowly raised his head, tears shining in his eyes. "No. I watched you grow from a little boy who raced through these gardens every spring. I rang this chapel bell on the day you were born. I would know your face anywhere." Damien stood speechless. Olivia instinctively looked toward him, then back to the caretaker. The old man noticed the uncertainty in Damien's expression almost immediately. "You do not remember," he said softly. Damien lowered his eyes. "I remember nothing before the storm." The caretaker's face filled with sorrow, but he quickly motioned them inside the quiet chapel. Heavy oak doors closed behind them, shutting out the afternoon breeze. He disappeared into a small storage room and returned carrying an aged wooden chest. From inside he carefully lifted a folded royal banner embroidered with the same silver wolf Olivia had seen hidden inside Damien's clothing. There could be no mistake anymore. The missing traveler she had pulled from the mountains was not merely a wounded stranger. He truly was the Alpha Prince the entire kingdom had been searching for, and somewhere beyond those peaceful forest hills, people willing to rewrite the future of the crown were already moving closer. The elderly caretaker introduced himself as Brother Thomas and quietly locked the chapel doors before leading Olivia and Damien into a modest library tucked behind the sanctuary. Shelves lined with weathered journals and royal histories filled the room with the comforting scent of old paper and cedar. Brother Thomas placed the folded banner upon the table with great care before looking directly at Damien. For 28 years I have prayed that this kingdom would never lose the son who was born to unite it, he said. If your memories have disappeared, then we must protect your life until they return. Damien lowered his eyes, struggling to accept words that felt as though they belonged to someone else. I wish I could believe you without question, he admitted. But I cannot even remember my own childhood. Brother Thomas nodded with gentle understanding. Memory does not always disappear forever. Sometimes the heart remembers long before the mind does. Olivia watched the conversation quietly, noticing how naturally Damien carried himself despite his uncertainty. Even sitting in a simple wooden chair, there was an unmistakable calm dignity about him that no forgotten memory could erase. As Brother Thomas poured warm tea into 3 small cups, he reached beneath the table and carefully unfolded an old map of the Northern Territories. Several routes had been marked in faded blue ink. The capital is no longer safe, he explained softly. Too many loyal guards have vanished from public view, and those who remain answer to voices I no longer recognize. If you travel openly, you will be found before sunset. Damien studied the map. Without understanding why, one particular road caught his attention. His finger rested upon it almost instinctively. The instant he touched the parchment, a sharp image flashed through his mind. Towering castle gates opened beneath silver banners while thousands of voices cheered. A smiling older man placed a steady hand upon his shoulder and said, "One day this road will lead you home." Damien inhaled sharply as the vision disappeared. Olivia reached for his arm with quiet concern. "What did you see?" He blinked several times before answering. "Only a moment. But it felt real. Someone was waiting for me." Brother Thomas smiled with cautious hope. "Then your memories are returning one piece at a time." Before anyone could speak again, the chapel bell outside rang once. Then twice. Then a third time. Brother Thomas's peaceful expression immediately changed. "No one should be here." He carefully peered through a narrow window overlooking the front path. A lone traveler stood beside a grey horse wearing the familiar green cloak Olivia recognized at once. It was the mysterious elderly woman who had visited the cabin. Brother Thomas hurried outside while Olivia and Damien remained hidden. Minutes later the old woman entered carrying a small leather pouch. Her eyes rested briefly on Damien before turning toward Olivia. "The forest carried you safely because it knew your heart," she said gently. She opened the pouch and revealed an ornate signet ring engraved with the same silver. "Wolf beneath the crescent moon." This was hidden many years ago for the day it would be needed again. Damien accepted the ring carefully. The moment it touched his hand, another memory surged through him. He saw a magnificent throne room, heard a familiar voice call him by name, and remembered one final sentence with perfect clarity. "Trust the healer, even when you cannot trust the crown." His eyes slowly lifted toward Olivia. He could not remember his past completely, but for the first time since awakening in the forest, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever had sent those words into his memory had expected Olivia Brooks to become part of his journey long before either of them realized destiny had already begun. Morning gave way to a cool grey afternoon as Brother Thomas guided Olivia, Damien, and the mysterious woman through a forgotten stone passage beneath the chapel. The narrow corridor had once connected the sanctuary to an abandoned watchtower overlooking the valley, a secret known only to a handful of loyal servants of the old king. When they finally emerged into daylight, the woman introduced herself at last. "My name is Eleanor," she said quietly. "Your mother entrusted me with the ring before she passed. She believed the day would come when the truth would need a witness more than a warrior." Damien listened in silence, turning the royal signet ring between his fingers. Every few moments another faint memory surfaced, never complete enough to answer every question, yet strong enough to convince him that Eleanor spoke honestly. Before they could continue, a distant church bell echoed from the nearest village. Brother Thomas's face grew pale. "That bell is not calling people to worship," he said. "It is announcing a royal proclamation." The four of them climbed the ridge overlooking the village square. From behind the shelter of towering oak trees they watched a royal messenger unroll a parchment before a gathering crowd. His voice carried clearly through the crisp mountain air. By decree of the Royal Council, the missing Alpha Prince has been declared lost beyond recovery. Until further notice, Lord Cedric Ashford shall assume the responsibilities of regent to preserve the peace of the kingdom. A murmur swept through the villagers. Some lowered their heads in sorrow. Others applauded politely, believing they had just witnessed the lawful continuation of the crown. Damien felt an unexpected ache spread through his chest. The name Cedric stirred something painful inside him. He closed his eyes, and another memory flashed before him. A smiling nobleman placing a reassuring hand upon his shoulder during a celebration. The same man whispering, "You may trust me with anything." Damien opened his eyes abruptly. "Cedric," he breathed. "He is my uncle." Eleanor looked at him with quiet sadness. "And once your father's closest advisor." Olivia studied Damien's expression carefully. "Do you remember more?" He nodded slowly. "Only pieces. Enough to know that I trusted him completely." Brother Thomas folded his arms. "Then that trust may have been the greatest weapon ever used against the throne." None of them noticed a young stable boy quietly slipping away from the edge of the village after recognizing Olivia from her medicine deliveries. Hoping to earn a generous reward, he hurried toward the nearest royal outpost to report exactly where he had seen the missing traveler. By sunset, the first patrols had already begun moving toward the old watchtower. Unaware that their hiding place had been revealed, Damien and the others continued deeper into the hills until they reached a quiet overlook facing the distant capital. Even from many miles away, the silver towers of the royal palace gleamed beneath the fading sunlight. Damien stared at them as though looking at a forgotten home from another lifetime. Without warning, the final words of his father returned with perfect clarity. "A crown is never protected by power alone. It survives because ordinary people choose courage when fear would be easier." Damien slowly turned toward Olivia. Every step that had carried him this far, every breath he still drew, every memory beginning to return had been made possible because one healer refused to abandon a stranger in the rain. While the palace prepared to celebrate a new ruler, the true heir quietly made a different promise to himself. He would not return seeking revenge. He would return carrying the truth, because only the truth could save both his family and the kingdom that had already begun mourning a prince who was still very much alive. Before sunrise the following morning, Damien, Olivia, Brother Thomas, and Eleanor reached the outer edge of the capital where loyal friends of the late king had quietly gathered after receiving secret messages from the old caretaker. None of them came carrying banners or seeking glory. They came carrying letters, royal records, and memories that had survived long after fear had settled over the kingdom. One by one, they placed those records before the council assembled in the Great Hall. The royal signet ring matched the ancient seal kept inside the palace archives. Brother Thomas testified that he had known the prince since the day of his birth. Eleanor presented the written instructions entrusted to her by the Queen years before. Finally, Damien stepped forward. As he looked across the familiar chamber, every remaining fragment of his memory returned like sunrise breaking through a long winter storm. He remembered his father teaching him that leadership began with compassion before strength. He remembered his mother placing the silver bracelet around his wrist and telling him that kindness would reveal true allies when titles could not. He remembered the journey that had ended in the mountains and the faces of those who had betrayed his trust. Yet when the council waited for him to demand punishment, Damien simply spoke with calm honesty. He described what he remembered, what he did not remember, and the ordinary healer who had protected him without asking his name, his title, or expecting anything in return. Silence filled the chamber. Then the oldest council member slowly rose to his feet. Others followed. One after another, every loyal voice in the hall acknowledged the rightful heir. Outside, the news spread through the capital faster than the morning bells. The kingdom had not lost its prince after all. It had nearly failed to recognize him. Days later, beneath clear blue skies, the palace courtyard filled with families from every corner of the realm. Damien accepted the ceremonial mantle not as a symbol of victory over his enemies, but as a promise to serve with wisdom and mercy. When the formal vows ended, the master of ceremonies stepped forward carrying a jeweled medal prepared for the healer who had preserved the future of the crown. Damien gently stopped him. Instead of remaining upon the marble platform, he walked down the wide staircase until he stood directly before Olivia. The entire courtyard fell silent. Olivia looked around uncertainly, convinced there must be some mistake. Damien smiled with the quiet warmth she had first seen beside the cabin fireplace. Then, before nobles, guards, merchants, and children alike, he lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps swept across the crowd. "The kingdom searched for its prince," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "but the future of this kingdom was protected by a woman who never asked who I was before choosing to help me. She saw a life worth saving when everyone else saw only danger." He gently took Olivia's hand. "Every step that brought me home began with your courage." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as the courtyard erupted into joyful applause. Damien rose and placed the silver bracelet back around his own wrist before offering his other hand to her. She accepted it with a smile that needed no words. In the months that followed, the kingdom slowly healed. Villages once forgotten received physicians and schools. The royal court welcomed wisdom from ordinary citizens alongside trusted advisors. Whenever people asked King Damien how the future had been saved, he always gave the same answer. Not by a crown. Not by a sword. It was saved by one act of kindness offered to a stranger on a rainy night. And every time he told that story, he looked toward Olivia, remembering that true strength had found him long before he ever found his throne.